Well, this is a new one for me. We're going to talk about a fighting game, two of them. Is it even appropriate to call it the Persona 4 Arena series, given that there are only 2 games? Anyway, welcome folks to part 1 of the Persona spin-off marathon. We've tackled the 3rd, 4th, and 5th main games, so now it's time to dive into the side projects Atlus have put out before we go into Persona 1 and 2. The spin-offs don't really seem to care about the 1st and 2nd games. I guess we'll find out why when we eventually get to them. For now, though, let's take a look at the first of the Persona spin-offs, based on games that were themselves spin-offs, Persona 4 Arena.
I'm not sure why I haven't reviewed a fighting game until now, but I suppose there's not usually a great deal to talk about. Most, if not all, fighting games basically play the same, but have their own different mechanics to stick out from the rest. Otherwise, the objective always involves pulling off various combos and button combinations with your favorite characters to unleash flashy moves that lower your opponent's health until they're down. I definitely have at least some experience with fighting games. I'm not absolutely hardcore with the genre, but sometimes I just want to blow off steam for a bit by punching some virtual stranger in the face before he knocks my lights out. Back when my first home console was the PS2, if it wasn't 3D platformers my family owned, it was most likely a fighting game. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution, Soul Calibur 2, Tekken 5, and by the time we had an Xbox, there was Dead or Alive 2 Ultimate, which sadly isn't in our library anymore. I probably shouldn't have played it at 10 years old anyway, but I'm too busy knocking people into another part of the stage to care. God, that was cool. I didn't dabble into something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter until much later, where I would emulate Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo, which eventually led me to buying Street Fighter 4 for my PS4 and Mortal Kombat 9 for my PS3. As for the Persona 4 Arena games, I didn't know they existed until I was playing Persona 4 Golden back in 2018. Much like the Persona series in general, these were pretty under the radar for me, but nevertheless, I was intrigued. I could have Chie dragon kick Yosuke a bunch of times for disrespecting your cooking. I could find out who's the better Velvet Room attendant between Elizabeth and Margaret, and I can beat the crap out of Yukari for being such a horrible person. Atlus once again are the ones responsible for putting the Arena titles together, but this time they aren't the only ones developing them. Assisting Atlus is a little company known as Arc System Works, who seem to have a lot of experience with creating arcade-style fighting games and handling other properties like Dragon Ball and, no joke, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, as well as the Sonic Drift games? What the hell? Well, anyway, Arc System Works are mostly better known for their other fighting series, Blazblue. In fact, there's even a Blazblue game guest starring Persona characters, alongside some from the Ruby series and Under Night in Birth, neither of which I've played or seen, by the way, but I have heard good things about Ruby. I've also never played a single Blazblue game in my life, so if you're hoping I'm gonna do a comparison between that and the Persona 4 Arena games, then sorry, but no. From what I can tell though, they're pretty much the same thing, just with different characters. The first Persona 4 Arena title, released in 2012 in the US and 2013 in Europe for the PlayStation 3 and, for once, the Xbox 360. And even some arcade cabinets exist somewhere along with its sequel. I'd love to get my hands on one. I'm a huge sucker for arcade cabinets, but it doesn't seem like a whole lot were made. I'm not even sure if they're still around anymore. Oh well, the PS3 and Xbox versions are no different whatsoever, and I guess you can always buy one of those USB arcade stick things if you want the full experience. I also really love it when games use HD sprites instead of 3D models, especially in fighting games. The sprites and animations are amazing in the Persona 4 Arena titles. I couldn't possibly imagine the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that went into every frame for each character, which is why it pains me to see how the story mode's cutscenes are presented. It's just the characters' portraits with some poorly photoshopped flapping mouths. I get that it's supposed to look like a visual novel, but it just comes across as very lazy for a company that's clearly capable of doing decent animations. I'm not saying that the whole story mode should be animated, and I understand that not everybody is going to have an issue with this style, but I personally think they could have made this more visually appealing. Look at what they do with the arcade mode. They have the characters' portraits at the bottom with the dialogue, and the sprites perform different actions based on what's being said. That's way better. Why wasn't the story mode presented like this? Nobody likes the visual novel style in Persona 3 Portable, but at least that had the excuse of being on the PSP where space was limited. This is a late PS3 and 360 game. The cutscenes should not look this simplistic, and most of the voice acting isn't as good either, but it's not necessarily the actors' faults. Arena came out only a year after Persona 4 Golden and 3 years after Persona 3 Portable, when the voice talent had to come back and redo their lines to fit with the female protagonist, so I imagine everyone was probably exhausted by that point. It would happen to me, it would happen to you, so I'm not going to blame the actors for their inferior deliveries. I'll give kudos to the new actress for Fuka though, she's a hell of a lot better than the original actress in my opinion, and instead of Troy Baker voicing Kanji, it's Matthew Mercer who does a spot-on impression of him, and even Kanji's shadow. I actually thought it was still Troy Baker. Interestingly as well, they've now decided to let Yu talk, and the characters now refer to him as Yu Narukami. Johnny Young Bosch does a perfectly good job with him. For someone with a very distinct voice, I think he best suits someone like Yu. He's got the charm down pretty well, but can also be stern when he needs to be. As for the actual story in the story mode, it's not great, unfortunately. Keep in mind that the arena games do take place not only after Persona 4, but also Persona 3, so if you haven't finished those games yet, then it's best to avoid doing the story mode until you've done so, but I'll do my best not to give away too much from either of them, although I am going to talk about the plot for the arena games in their entirety. I know I don't usually do that with Persona games, but you're really not missing much here. It's also worth mentioning that the story has branches from multiple people's perspectives. I'm unclear which ones are considered canon or not, but the gist of the story is all the same regardless. 2 months have passed since the events of Persona 4, and 3 years after Persona 3. The Midnight Channel is completely gone, oh yeah, no surprise, everybody wins in the end, and Yu comes back to Inaba for Golden Week to visit his friends and family again. He gathers round with Yosuke, Chie, and Yukiko for some reminiscing, but the reunion's going to be pretty short-lived. They see on TV that the Midnight Channel has returned, but this time it's putting together a fighting tournament known as the P1 Grand Prix, where the host appears to be Teddy in a war general's outfit, and his assistant happens to be Rise, going by her idol guise Rosette again. The commercial also seems to be showing each member of the investigation team as participating fighters, giving each of them a title, including those who are currently not with you and the others, like Kanji and Naoto. This means the investigation team is back in action, and the following day they head inside the TV to get a better look at the situation, only to find themselves separated from each other and all end up somewhere with a striking resemblance to Yasogami High, the school everybody goes to. Meanwhile, on the Persona 3 side, Aigis, A Naked Akihiko, and Kirijo DeVille here have formed a little group called the Shadow Operatives, basically C's on a more global scale. Fuka makes a rare appearance as well to assist with her hacking skills, but this isn't until the end of the story, so she's pretty downplayed this time around. If you're wondering where Yukari, Junpei, and Ken are, well, they don't really explain what happened to them until Arena Ultimax, so I'll come back to this later. Anyway, the Shadow Operatives are under their own investigation, it seems, as well, when one of Mitsuru's company planes has been hijacked, apparently holding another anti-shadow weapon similar to Aigis called Labris, and coincidentally, Labris has been tracked to Inaba, where the Persona 4 crew are. Everybody gets themselves ready to enter the TV, followed by Naoto shortly after, who's been hired by public safety to keep tabs on the Kirijo group. Little do the Shadow Operatives know, however, that by stepping inside the TV world, they are also now part of the P1 Grand Prix. And from here on out, the story mostly plays the same tune over and over. The characters meet up with one another, and the person you're not playing as will throw harsh comments towards you based on their mental weaknesses, eventually building up enough rage to trigger a fight. You win the fight, and it's revealed that the aggressive nature from your opponent was all an illusion, and vice versa. The loser is blocked from progressing by these invisible walls, prompting your chosen character to go on without them. Your character will also accidentally bump into this random girl who's completely unaware that she's in the TV world, and claims to be the student council president of the school, even though the investigation team don't recognize her at all. Yeah, I bet you know where this is going. Everybody also at some point locates the real Teddy, who explains that he's not the one putting together the tournament, and neither is that the real Rise he's with. She and Teddy were actually kidnapped by the imposter Teddy, who calls himself General Teddy. Oh, and Elizabeth pops in from time to time as well, but she serves next to no purpose aside from testing Yu and Aigis' abilities, and helping Labris reach an epiphany. Oh, whoops, did I accidentally just call the girl Labris? Clumsy me. You know, it was such a well-kept secret I couldn't contain myself. Yeah, so the girl is actually an anti-shadow weapon, as told by General Teddy in the flesh, but he has a secret of his own. General Teddy is merely a disguise for Labris' shadow, and the one responsible for putting together the P1 Grand Prix. This is where things get a little more interesting, however, as we dive into Labris' story and discover her origins. During some testing within the Kirijo group, she was forced to fight other anti-shadow models, which didn't bother Labris at first, but over time she grew a close bond with one of the other models, as well as a conscience of her own through a little device known as a Plume of Dusk. Labris also believes that her personality comes from this girl somewhere in a hospital, thus thinking of her as Labris' mother, and wanting to search for her someday. Because Labris has suddenly developed sentiment, however, it pained her greatly when one test involved her having to battle and destroy her only friend, who had been reprogrammed to not have feelings or emotions. Filled with rage after winning the fight, Labris broke out of the lab only to be recaptured again and sealed away. Then, once the hijacking on Mitsuru's plane occurred, Labris got thrown into the TV world and brainwashed into thinking that she's human, trapping her inside this illusion of Yasogami High. The P1 Grand Prix was her shadow's way of making everyone see what Labris had to go through, and after defeating her shadow in a fight, Labris comes to accept accept what she's done, turning the Shadow into her very own persona, exactly how the investigation team got theirs in Persona 4. Everything should be wrapping up here, but right at the very last minute, there's yet another culprit who's revealed to be the puppet master behind everything, temporarily communicating with everyone by hacking into Labrys' system. His or her plan was to try and imitate the character's shadows to mentally weaken their owners, reverting their personas back to their original form. After one last fight with the possessed Labrys, the criminal retreats for the sequel, leaving Labrys back to normal. The Shadow operatives tell the investigation team to butt out of this operation as they try to find out who's responsible, but Yu discreetly tells his friends to pursue the case anyway. Labrys decides to help Mitsuru and the Shadow operatives since they have no intention of bringing Labrys back to the laboratory, and Aigus offers to help look for the girl that made Labrys who she is. The story ends on a cliffhanger, ready for the next game to take place. It's a good thing Arena did well enough, otherwise this ending would have seemed pretty arrogant. So there's quite a lot of plot here for a fighting game, and it gets absurdly chatty. I hope you like static imagery and tons of text with a few spelling errors, because you're not gonna believe this. Fully completing Persona 4 Arena story mode takes up to 25 hours. 25 hours of just this. And the fighting you do in between, you know, the meat and potatoes of this package, you barely do any of it. I'd say at best you're maybe doing an hour's worth of fights. The rest of it is just talking and reading. And yes, the main Persona games had a lot of talking and reading too. But aside from being more interesting to look at, the information dump at least amounted to something, such as improving your relationship with a character and giving you more benefits. There are some humorous moments, and I do like Labrys as a character. She's got an interesting backstory and a spunky but lovable personality. Though, is there any particular reason she has a Jersey accent?
Oh, of course. You all mixed up in this racket too, aren't you?
But aside from that, this story has hardly anything of substance, and the times you do get to fight are over before you know it. Each character's story ranges between 40 minutes to an hour, or in Aigus and Labrys' case, they can go on for at least an hour and a half. God damn! However, each story, except for Labrys and Elizabeth, all ends in a cliffhanger when Labrys is unveiled as a machine, meaning you'll still have to go through the second part of the story with every character. Granted, the second part doesn't take quite as long as the first part, just around 30 minutes, maybe a little longer. Again, I call back to Aigus' perspective going on for a full hour. But by the time I reach that point, I'm burned out. I get so tired of looking at these cutscenes, and before anyone tells me, I know that you don't actually have to finish all of the characters' stories to learn everything. If you're a Persona fan or a completionist though, then you're not just gonna want to do the bare minimum. You'll want to see everything, but the journey was not at all fun for me. This story has no business being 25 hours long, and it overstays its welcome incredibly fast. This is a problem when you base your story from multiple people's perspectives, because you have to keep re-establishing the rules and who everybody is. There's a total of 12 characters you have to go through before you finish Persona 4 Arena, and it wears on your brain going through the same tedious motions over and over again. If the game simply stuck with one continuous path, then it wouldn't have been quite as much of a slog, but as is, the multiple pathways are completely unnecessary, and on top of a couple paths potentially amounting to joke endings like with Kanji, Chie, and Yukiko, it feels like I just wasted my goddamn time.
And look, I understand that writing stories around fighting games is difficult, especially when you're taking characters that initially liked each other and have to find an excuse for them to duke it out. The only fighting game that immediately pops into my head in terms of having a decent story mode is Mortal Kombat 9. If you enjoyed the story mode in Persona 4 Arena, then more power to you, but for me it was just too much of a chore to go through, and I certainly won't be doing it again. However, I don't usually play fighting games for the story. All that matters to me is who I'm facing against and what combos I can use to kick their teeth in.
I think it's about time we actually start getting into the fighting part of this fighting game, don't you? On the face buttons, every character has a basic, weak, and heavy attack and 2 persona attacks, and certain combinations will let you perform a few special attacks of their own. Pressing both persona buttons will let the character throw their opponents. Pressing the heavy attack and heavy persona buttons activate furious actions to stop your opponent from being too aggressive, and pressing both the weak and heavy attack buttons will initiate an all-out attack upon contact to chip some health away. Blocking can be done by going backwards in traditional fighting game fashion, and characters can evade by pressing the weak attack and weak persona buttons. With the exception of a few character-specific moves, combos and special attacks are all executed in the same way, like the classic quarter circle attack maneuvers. Continuously tapping the weak attack button and landing hits on your opponent will automatically perform what's known as an auto combo. A short string of attacks damage your rival for a bit, and then it finishes off with one of the character's special moves. It's pretty nifty and a good way to get casual players and newbies to come to grips with the game more easily. That is, if you have enough SP to pull off the the special moves in the first place. Using special moves requires that you have at least 25 SP on the meter, and your health needs to be at a certain level before your character awakens to their persona, allowing them to activate their abilities. It's very similar to something like EX attacks from Street Fighter 4. The only ones you can use without awakening to your persona are the auto combos. It's useful for making sure your rival doesn't totally obliterate you in mere seconds, but as someone who's not all that great with fighting games, I would have maybe liked to have them just a little bit earlier. However, personas can also be broken, indicated by these tarot cards below your health. When you or your rival's personas are hit, that depletes a card, and when they're all out, personas are temporarily disabled, meaning you can't do special moves or use regular persona attacks. Don't let it happen to you, because it sucks big time when you can only do so much. Alternatively, I guess you can always use a one more cancel for 50 SP to return your character to their original fighting positions and keep the flow going. The maximum amount of SP you can hold at the start of each round is 100, but awakening to your persona will increase that to 150. SP can be earned by doing pretty much anything, attacking, blocking, or getting hit, but there's also this thing here called a burst. You can only use it once before it needs to recharge, but it knocks your opponents out of harm's reach, and hitting them with it also completely fills up your SP gauge. Something to consider if you're in dire need of SP, especially if you want to pull off these instant kill attacks. Yes, instant kill attacks in a fighting game. They cost 100 SP to activate, but that's super easy to get because of the methods I just pointed out, and they're not able to be cancelled once they start. You'll simply have to try and avoid getting caught. They're really cool and crazy helpful during single player, but I would not recommend using them in multiplayer unless you're willing to lose some friends. That's about all there is to say about the actual gameplay side of things. It does take a little time to get a grasp on how everything works, but it's not as scary as it may seem. You'll pick things up naturally as you're playing, whether it's a character's combos or just figuring out the mechanics of the game. There's a tutorial mode anyway in case you desperately need the help, as well as a training mode to practice with, an arcade mode which puts you against a specific set of fighters, and there's the impossibly unfair score attack mode, where you have to beat various fighters with jacked up stats. I don't think it's possible to win in a fair fight in this mode. You basically have no choice but to be that annoying player that keeps spamming the same moves over and over. Like most fighting games, I'd also highly suggest purchasing a fighting stick to make performing combos a lot easier, even if it's something cheap but professionally made, such as the Hori mini stick. Persona 4 Arena as a game though, it's not the best in the genre, but I can still have a good time with it. My only major complaint is with the tedious as crap story mode, with my only reward for fully finishing it being Teddy as the match commentator, hippity freaking Ray. I will give it praise for the stellar anime cutscenes, well the few that are there anyway, but at least the Persona 3 casts look way better here than they ever did in their respective game. Sound mixing's another issue however. Just as well you can read the dialogue because the music is way too loud at times, and it's not at all subtle with its looping. I don't think they even tried to hide it. It really takes you out of the immersion sometimes. I'd say just ignore the story mode and stick with the other single player modes or battle your friends and family, but if you're gonna play a Persona fighting game, then you're better off playing Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, which only came out a year later. Based on the title, I don't think anyone would blame you for thinking that this is the same game, just with more stuff. But no, this is in fact a straight sequel to Persona 4 Arena. The gameplay is literally no different than the first game. It's beat for beat, absolutely nothing has changed. The only new things added to the sequel are more stages, a continuation to the story, and more characters to choose from, including Rise, Yukari, Junpei, Ken, and Koromaru, the new characters Sho, and a few DLC characters on top of this. Marie, Margaret, and one other person that I can't show off as it's a major spoiler to Persona 4. I'm not sure I like the way Yukari's looking at me there. That would be the new shadow types added to the roster as well for most of the characters, but there are only a few differences between them and the normal characters. Movesets are altered to be more on the offensive side, though the damage you inflict is reduced. The amount of SP you also acquire in one round will carry over to the next, and instead of a burst ability, shadow types have unlimited SP for a short time. It's a bit of a high risk, high reward kind of thing. I'm not very good with the shadow types myself personally, but I can see them helping you in the long run if you know how to use them properly. Arcade mode and score attack is back if you fancy just going through a multitude of battles at once, and there's also a brand new mode called Golden Arena. Here you battle through many floors and earn experience points after winning to acquire new fighting skills, similar to the main fighting Persona games. You don't unlock anything by playing this, so it's more of a time sink than anything. I suppose we should also see how Ultimax's story compares to its predecessor. Well, first off, while there are still multiple pathways to take, they're all connected in one coherent storyline, and there are only two different perspectives this time. One from the Persona 4 side, and one from the Persona 3 side, and completing both of them takes around 16 hours. A major improvement over the first game, but don't get too excited, it's still a pretty dull story altogether. And I swear the Persona 3 side takes twice as long as the Persona 4 side, and I'm not sure why. Taking place just a day after the events of the first game, the Midnight Channel has returned again, promoting yet another fighting tournament called the P1 Climax, with Mitsuru, Aigis, Akihiko, and Fuka captured and crucified. General Teddy comes back as the host of the P1 Climax, confusing everyone for how he's still around, but he brings about this red fog all over Inaba, and emerges a tall tower that looks remarkably similar to Tartarus, clarifying that the world will end within an hour. Oh Christ, don't tell me I have to climb 264 floors again. Thankfully, that's not the case, and not only are the investigation team involved with this mess, but Yukari, Junpei, and Ken have been called in to help too. They didn't seem to be a part of the Shadow Operatives at first because they're still underage, which if that's the case, what do you call stepping into Tartarus to fight shadows? Just a nightly stroll? That's arguably more dangerous than what you're doing here. This calls back to my point in the Persona 3 review where C's act more like co-workers than friends. From what I could gather, they haven't even tried contacting each other throughout the past 3 years. They're all too busy with their jobs, not making time for anybody. That aside though, I found these parts of the story to be more interesting than what was going on with the investigation team given how much more time has passed. Before everything happened, Junpei went to coach a kid's baseball team, Ken's on the soccer team in high school and taking care of Koromaru, and Yukari gained a starring role in the show Featherman, basically this universe's equivalent to Power Rangers. As the investigation team move forward to get some answers and rescue the Shadow Operatives, they're approached by shadows of their friends or sometimes their own shadows, encouraging them to fight. Suddenly, in comes this pale-looking teenager with a scar on his face named Sho, who tells the team that he's the one behind everything. Huh, that was fast. Mystery solved. Sho doesn't seem to be a Persona user, nor is he very bright, all things considered, but he does appear to have somewhat of a split personality with his other self known as Minazuki, who's a lot more intelligent. After some time fighting everyone's shadows and entering the other Tartarus, all of the Shadow Operatives have been rescued, and Minazuki reveals his grand plan. While every one of the tournament's battles were going on, little fragments from the characters' personas and the Shadow's personas consistently chip away, and now that Minazuki has enough of them, he can summon a powerful entity to destroy the world. The reason for this? Sho claims to be the son of Akutsuki from Persona 3. Oh god, who slept with him? What drove her to do that? Was he really so irresistibly punny? Actually, it turns out Sho was merely one of the test subjects for Akutsuki to see if he could force someone to have a persona by using a plume of dusk, with Sho being considered his favorite guinea pig. As a result of those experiments, that's why Sho and Minazuki are the same person. However, Sho utterly despises Akutsuki for making him go through all that, keeping him in isolation for so long, and abandoning him afterwards, filling Sho with a lot of built-in hatred towards the world, wanting to destroy it so that he can be the only living person on Earth. Everyone proceeds to face Sho at the top of the tower, and oh hey, General Teddy's still a thing, revealing himself to be the malevolent being Ino Kakutsuchi as he possesses Sho. I'm not sure if this is the entity Minazuki summoned earlier since General Teddy was here well before then, but who cares, it's another god for the investigation team and the Shadow Operatives to defeat. On the Persona 4 side, it's Yu who decides to take him on, while on the Persona 3 side, it's Labris, as the others fend off a swarm of shadows. Kakutsuchi is defeated, Sho is returned to normal, and the tower begins to collapse, with Margaret suddenly appearing and teleporting everyone into the TV world. There's then an epilogue just before the gang leaves the tower, sort of acting like an alternate ending. In a desperate attempt to make players feel pity for Sho, he proceeds to explain how upon waking up in a hospital after the experiments were done on him, a huge wad of cash was left by Akutsuki to pay for his medical expenses. Unfortunately, Sho decided to run off with the money instead, and watch the entire Inaba murder case happen in Persona 4. He figured that since the investigation team were bonding by fighting together that he could be a part of that, but for some reason chose not to in the end. When the case was over, Kakutsuchi asked Sho if he wanted to destroy the world, to which he blindly agreed. Sho starts feeling lost about what to do now since he's only known how to fight, but he believes that he can use that to form bonds by having friendly bouts, starting with Yu, who agrees to do so. That's great, but can we maybe get off the collapsing tower first? Priorities? What are those? It just doesn't seem like these conflicted feelings warrant erasing all existence. His inner struggles simply feel unreal to me, and I couldn't care less. Show's merely a kid throwing a temper tantrum, and I don't see him any other way. That aside, everyone returns safely, Labris finds the girl by visiting her grave, the investigation team and the Shadow Operative spend some time together to celebrate their victory, and they all go back to their normal lives. Ultimax's story can basically be summed up as second verse same as the first. The focus is just now on Sho instead of Labris, and the tournament's now spread to the whole of Inaba. It's a little more interesting than the first game, but it's still pretty weak in terms of Persona stories. Sho is not a very compelling character to me. He's just incredibly angry all the time. He's not clever, he's not funny, and Jesus H. Christ, does he have to scream every line of his?
I already know that he was a goddamn bastard, so what? It doesn't matter. He was all that I had in the world.
Minazuki was kind of entertaining since he's more soft-spoken and his vocabulary's a lot better, but his motives in helping Sho were highly questionable. Not a fan as well of how right at the very end the game tries to make Sho seem like a misunderstood, tortured soul, despite nearly destroying the world. This is especially apparent when Labris keeps attempting to befriend him, but she really shouldn't. Sympathize with him all you want, he tried to murder a shit ton of people because of daddy issues, and he's still smack-talking you for being a machine.
He's an asshole.
And why's Theodore here too? He shows up only a few times to give motivational speeches and then doesn't do anything else. He's not even a playable character, which is a crime in itself. Poor Theo, maybe the Q games will treat you better.
Spoilers, they don't.
Like with the first game, it's best to simply stick with the other modes, but when you're actually fighting, it's quite enjoyable. If you're just looking for a fighting game with plenty of characters to choose from the Persona series, you'll get it here. And you can watch your brother kick your ass with Margaret. Goddamn cheater! Look how long it takes to break her personas. Anyway, the animations are great, matches are satisfying, and it's even better when you have a buddy to play with, as is the case with many other fighting games. It's not terribly expensive either, unless you buy it digitally, and I really wouldn't recommend purchasing all of the DLC, except for the extra characters. Atlus are well known for making great games, but are terrible when it comes to DLC, charging you for every scrap of music and cosmetics that don't even mean a damn. I guess no one's perfect.
So a bit of a bumpy start to the marathon, and I certainly wasn't expecting to be talking about fighting games for so long. Next up though, the investigation team and Seize join together to battle evil in Persona Q, Shadow of the Labyrinth for the 3DS. No way in hell is this going to be a dual review between this and Persona Q2, because unlike the Arena games, these two are full-blown RPGs, so yeah, gonna need some time for each of them. In the meantime, while I get set up for the first Persona Q game, let's tackle an extremely bizarre Japanese game that I'm sure some of you probably know about, Katamari Damacy. Thank you all for watching, you all have a good day, and take care. So now it's time to dive into the For now though, let's take a gander at the first of the Persona spin-offs, based on games that were in of themselves spin-offs, Persona 4 Arena. Screwed it up at the end. Based on games that were in of oh, god damn it. In the meantime, we're gonna talk god damn it. So now it's time to dive into the side stuff Atlus have put out before we go and okay, keep it together. Based on games that were themselves spin-offs, Persona 4 Arena. About time, Jesus.